That rand weakening yesterday afternoon all the way up to 667. If you consider it hit 654 on Monday, that's quite a slide. At the same time, though, we have seen the euro strengthening against the dollar, so the rand going a little bit counter there.
Yes, good morning, Stephen. We've had some interesting developments. I think the pullback that we've seen in the rand has really been a function of these softer commodity prices. But for all intents and purposes, we're kind of stuck in this range between kind of 655 up to 670. And I think, like you said, the dollar remains under pressure, and that is probably also helping to limit the rand's weakness to the top side.
Any indication perhaps that we're seeing stronger importer demand at these levels, and also perhaps the Reserve Bank coming in and mopping up excess liquidity in the dollar market?
I wouldn't be surprised if either of those two participants are in the market at the moment. 655 has proven to be a fairly stubborn level to the downside, and we could very well see importers starting to cover some of their foreign exposure forward. And then coupled with that, we've seen the Reserve Bank continue to accumulate reserves in a very kind of mechanical fashion. And we would expect that at current levels, the Reserve Bank to be fairly active.
We've also had some pretty negative economic data out locally this week. So although PMI came in pretty strongly, we had vehicle sales numbers yesterday that appear to have disappointed. We also had that jobless number coming through earlier this week, 25%. Vehicle sales, 8% growth year on year, but quite a sharp contraction between March and April, Michael.
Yeah, there was a definite downtrend in the vehicle sales, but I think we've got to be careful about becoming too pessimistic about the vehicle sector, because obviously April was littered with public holidays, so there's a couple of distortions coming through from those holidays. We'll have to see whether or not those shoddy numbers continue in the May reading. If that does indeed prove to be the case, and I think the argument for an interest rate hike this year, as you said, unemployment figures weren't very impressive this week, and it seems like South Africa is creating kind of jobless growth, which is something that we're actually seeing across the globe. And I think it really is a global theme that central bankers are going to have to be very careful to tighten up their monetary policies in an environment where growth is still recovering in a very fragile fashion.
Well, we had ADP numbers out to the United States yesterday, also looking slightly disappointing, missing the mark. Of course, those coming ahead of the non-farm payroll numbers out of the United States tomorrow afternoon. Are we seeing a pretty much same picture in the United States, where we are seeing this jobless growth? Because we have seen that unemployment rates trending downwards.
Yes, exactly, Stephen. I think as kind of the ADP and the non-farm payrolls is the numbers that we really have to pay close attention to, because even though the unemployment rate in the States has been declining, a lot of that decline has been a function of discouraged job seekers actually just giving up and not actually looking for work. So I think we've got to look at the job creation that's taking place, and those ADP figures that we saw yesterday came in below consensus, and of course if that's followed up by some disappointing non-farm payrolls tomorrow afternoon, then I think it's just going to reiterate the expectations that the Fed is going to have to remain very accommodative going forward, and even though possibly the quantitative easing is going to finish halfway through this year, I think interest rates are going to remain low in the States for the foreseeable future.
What's your view, though, for interest rates in the Eurozone? Because we have that ECB meeting winding up this afternoon, and we've had that euro strengthening ahead of that meeting.
Yes, I think that's definitely filtered into the weaker dollar environment. Is of course on the other side of the pond, we've got the ECB actually talking quite hawkishly. We had them hiking interest rates a month ago. So we are expecting the balance of probability and the risk to lie in a continued hawkish tone coming out of the ECB today. We're not expecting them to hike rates. We're not expecting the BOE either to hike rates. But I think the ECB is probably going to be particularly vigilant on inflation. Of course, with oil prices having shot up in the past few months, they are particularly concerned about inflation. And remember, they don't have the dual mandate that the Fed does. They strictly are an inflation-fighting central bank, and as a result, we'd expect them to talk a hawkish tone. And of course, that doesn't bode well for the dollar from an interest rate differential perspective.
And then what would you expect the rand to do in that case, Michael?
Well, you know, as we said, it's been some interesting moves this week. I think, you know, if the ECB does talk a hawkish tone, we could very well see some of those commodity prices coming under pressure, and I'd expect the rand to weaken against most of the crosses. Against the dollar, though, we could sustain some of our gains as a result of a generally weaker dollar environment.